We are back. Little short break we took, but that's over. We're back. We're happy to be here. We're glad you are back with us. We still need you to like and subscribe, give us some good ratings, all that kind of stuff. Help us continue to grow. We are growing. We've gotten several new listeners from many different places. Russia, Dominican Republic. I don't think I told you guys about Dominican Republic.
Really?
Yeah, we're in there. We're on the island, living the island life. Canada. Canada's been there before, but checking back in. India is blowing up for us, guys. That's a good thing. So we would like to hear from you. Podcast at parkwaybc.net. Send us an email and let us know what you want us to talk about. Let us know where you listen, if you're listening from a faraway place, and tell us a little bit about you, and we'll share that on the air. And life advice, anything like that, let us know what you want us to talk about. If you have a question of, steak sauce, which is better, or something else that you want some information on, we would be happy to settle that debate. Make sure you say the right thing, though.
Uncle Bob's.
Uncle Bob's versus Country Bob's.
The only way to go.
My man. That's a great time to chime in. We're going to go ahead and
I don't even ever want to talk to you anymore.
Introduce our guest.
It's a great start.
We have moved up. We have a new table that's mostly finished. We were supposed to have new microphones tonight. They were delayed in shipping. We're elevating things, and we're elevating guests as well. With us tonight, we have former SEC Pitcher of the Year, first-round draft pick in the Major League Baseball draft, and I'm sure plenty of other accolades for our guest, Mr. Grayson Garvin. Thank you for being here.
Excited to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hey, we are moving up in the world, fellas. Ryan is straight bandwagon here. He's never even uttered the word Vanderbilt before. Grayson played.
Where's Vandy at again? I forgot.
Yeah. Grayson was
Wisconsin? Somewhere?
Stud
That sounds
pitcher.
about right. Sounds about right.
Stud pitcher for Vanderbilt. It was where Grayson went to college and became the big timer that he is today. So nothing. Nothing.
I don't really know about all of that, guys.
Yeah. Well, we're going to play it up. It's big
Crickets.
time for us. Yeah, I mean, that was your opportunity there, Grayson, to just say yes. We'll pump you up. You play the straight roll.
Okay,
We'll
no,
pump
that's
you
fine.
up.
It feels like a long time ago. Let's put it that way. I was blessed to have a lot of unique experience. Let's put it that way in baseball, and took me a lot of places, and thankfully it also brought me here. So I'm excited to unpack some of that this evening.
Yeah, we're going to get into that story and Grayson's walk with Christ and how that unfolded through all those different things, and have some fun along the way too. So, Grayson, why don't you just tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you grew up and how you came to know Christ?
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, I was born and raised outside of Atlanta, Georgia, so not too terribly far from here. Was so blessed to be, raised in a Christian home too. My parents both taught me from a very young age and really modeled for me what it was like to have a, very intentional walk with Christ, which is obviously what is required. So grew up in a Christian home, was really blessed there. But I would also say that, at some point, whether you were born into church, whether you grew up in church, whether you didn't, you came to know Christ at a later age, at some point you have to mature to the place where you own your faith yourself. So I accepted Christ when I was in 6th grade, but I would say really came to own my own faith somewhere in the middle of high school, 10th to 11th grade. And just continued to mature in my faith, also continued to mature on the baseball field. I really felt like, the Lord had given me the gifts that he had to be able to, further his kingdom. And we'll talk again a little bit more about how that got twisted in certain ways throughout the remainder of my kind of playing career. But I came to Nashville by way of Vanderbilt. I was blessed to play SEC baseball there back in 2008. So I know that, 100 people a day move here, but I've been here since 2008. So in some ways I feel like a local now. But
we'll claim you. It's been long enough.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So, and just met my wife at Vanderbilt, and we decided, Lord willing, that we would make our home here after baseball was over, if that was the Lord's will. And thankfully, again, we make our home south of Franklin. I was telling you guys that it feels like a pilgrimage to get up north of town, but it's good to be here, and excited to again to still live here in Nashville.
That is a bit of a haul for those of you who are not from here, not familiar with the area. Without traffic, I'd say solid 45.
It's 40 minutes.
Yeah, with traffic, anybody's guess.
Which my Atlanta self would be ashamed, because you can't get anywhere in under an hour. So to say that 35 minutes is a pilgrimage, but hey, it's like you get thin skin moving from the north going down south. It's like you get desensitized.
Well, you get acclimated to where you are, so
it's true.
Yeah, with traffic, if there's a wreck or it's raining, I mean that could be a 2-hour drive.
There will be a wreck. So you can always count on that.
It depends on the time of day. If it's rush hour, go ahead.
That was Sunday morning. What are you talking about?
Oh well,
you're welcome.
That was a chemical spill. Ryan saved me a solid 30-40 minutes of driving this past Sunday, because he was on the road. We both live in the same area, and he called to let me know, don't take the interstate, shut down for a chemical spill. So
I was stuck. There was no getting out of that.
Yeah.
Not a good feeling.
No.
Tyson chicken.
Ammonia.
That's what I heard.
That's what I heard.
Rumors. I don't know. But anyway, moving on to more important things.
Right.
So moving from Atlanta to Vanderbilt. So you were drafted, for those that don't know, actually out of high school, drafted by the Major League Baseball.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that's like for a high school kid to get drafted by the pros?
For sure. High school kids, going through that process, first off, getting, recruited to play college ball is a certain process that's, unique in and of itself. But then to have the opportunity, and in some ways kind of courted, for lack of a better term, by, the major league organizations, I'd say that it is a whirlwind process. You can think about it as really 30 different job interviews. So, scouts and things will come into your home at that age where, you're sitting around a kitchen table, you're sitting around your living room, and there are, psychological evaluations, tests that you take, normal kind of interview type process questions that, I would say that most people would not think of in that type of a setting. So that takes place kind of the fall, winter of your senior year, and then, you just go out and play. And there's kind of an allure, if you will, of, getting drafted, because from a young age, if you're a sports fan or you play any specific sport, a lot of times, kids idolize wanting to be drafted and play at the highest level.
Right.
And so there is there's an allure there and kind of a draw, but you're naive still, because you don't understand, kind of the business side of baseball, which also in some ways exists even in the college ranks as well. But I was fortunate, again, to have a pretty strong commitment to Vanderbilt, and in some ways that, turns some of the teams away, because they understand that most kids that decide to go to a place like Vanderbilt, there is, an importance placed on education that may not always be the case at some other institutions. So oftentimes that will turn teams away. And so I was drafted in the 45th round by the Houston Astros. But there wasn't a lot of dialogue after the draft of whether or not. I think I had one conversation with them, and they were like, "You going to school?" I was like, "I am." They're like, "Let us know if something changes," and that was kind of that. So I was thankful that it happened. It made me feel good.
Right.
But there wasn't, again, a lot of substance there. And fortunately, too, I was also sheltered in some ways by some of the more nasty business side of the game as well at that point.
Yeah. So it is a prestige thing, because, all little kids here, you're playing in the backyard, and if you're shooting basketball, you're making that last second shot, or you're playing football, you're throwing that winning touchdown and striking out a batter in baseball, whatever, or hitting a home run, whatever the case is. And that's a thing that we all imagine as kids here, but very few people get to experience that. So at that time you're being courted by pro teams and scouts and colleges at the same time, correct? Or no?
At that point, the college recruiting process, at least for me, was complete. So that took place more kind of sophomore, junior year of high school. So I thankfully had, kind of shut that door, decided to go to Vanderbilt, and was thankful that I didn't have to worry about a lot of that stuff and could just be a normal college or high school senior, if you will.
Right.
So most of that stuff was complete.
Normal, being, drafted, talking to draft scouts and stuff,
normally
yeah. That, not normal for all of us. So for people who are not from the Nashville area or from America, for our listeners outside of the states, or just anyone not familiar with baseball here, college baseball, Vanderbilt is one of the premier teams, college teams in the nation, and playing one of the best leagues, the Southeastern Conference, the SEC, one of the best leagues in the nation as well. So going to Vanderbilt and just making that team, being recruited, that's a high accomplishment in itself. What was that like? What was that process like of leaving home? Atlanta's about 4 hours away. Leaving home, leaving your family, going to college. I mean, that's stressful in itself, but you're walking into a mini business almost, a minor league franchise in some ways.
For sure. I'd say that looking back on it, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It is a business, but it's also, too, there's just, because of the caliber of school that Vanderbilt is, being a top 20 school, you could also put, again, the baseball program would be, in some ways, arguably a top 5 type baseball program in the country. There's just a lot of expectation on both sides there of, achieving and reaching certain standards. And so coming in as a freshman, not understanding that, thinking that, again, I would have in some ways some type of a normal, college experience. I couldn't have articulated what a normal college experience would have been like. I just had this in some ways kind of an idealized view that there was going to be free time and you were going to be able to do some of the things that you wanted to do. But I would say that 90 to 95% of your time is spent either doing some type of baseball-related activity or school.
Because in a Power 5 conference, football's the moneymaker, but, at a school like Vanderbilt, baseball is probably the premier program they have sports-wise. So that's, it's a moneymaker for them.
Sure.
So it is like a business.
Sure. And, in college athletics is very interesting in the way that, college kids, and this is obviously changing a little bit based on some of the legislation that's just come down the line, but it's college coaches' livelihoods at stake, and so for the kids, you're going to get an education, but for the coaching staff, across the board, if you're not performing or the teams are not winning, before too long, the coaches are going to be seeing the door, and so there's an interesting kind of dynamic there at play, as far as how that works, especially in a Power 5. I'd say across the board, a Power 5 school, there are high expectations across the board.
Yeah.
So the real question is, does Tim Corbin just come show up at your house and says, "I want you"?
That was not the way that I was recruited, no.
And I would say, "I want a redo right now. He needs to show up to my house. Come on."
No, and that's the interesting thing, too, about the recruiting process is it takes so many different shapes depending on when guys mature, depending on when guys are seen, because there's a variety of different coaches that are able to speak into that process. I might be wrong, but I do not believe that Corbs ever saw me play in person before I committed. The pitching coach, Derek Johnson, who's now the pitching coach of the Cincinnati Reds, and Eric Bakich, who's now the head coach at University of Michigan, were the two other coaches on staff at that point, and they had seen me in person multiple times. But I think at the point that I had committed, Tim had never seen me play in person.
What was the thing that made you want to choose Vanderbilt outside of just the academic side of it? Everything as far as, because you being drafted, I'm sure you could go anywhere, choose any school that you wanted to. So what made you pick Vanderbilt specifically?
Yeah, great question.
Do you know about how many schools recruited you, colleges recruited you, roughly?
That's kind of a tough question, too, with baseball. It works a little bit different than football and basketball. Sometimes there's initial interest shown, and if there's not any type of reciprocation, some of that stuff just kind of evaporates. So I spent some time kind of going back and forth with Georgia and Georgia Tech. Clemson was another school that's very close to my home outside of Atlanta, and they have a pretty prestigious historical baseball program. And then Virginia and Vanderbilt were kind of the 5 schools that I talked to pretty closely. But to answer your question, and I think we all could say that there have been people that have spoken into our lives in very specific moments. I had a hitting coach actually that was a Clemson alum of all places, and I was at one point very, very close to going to Clemson. And he probably has no idea about this now, but he specifically told me, he's like, you need to look elsewhere, because I think that, and again, no disrespect whatsoever to Clemson. It's a great school. But he said, I think that you need to look elsewhere and try to propel yourself academically with your, baseball ability. And so that caused me to take a little bit of a different viewpoint towards kind of the recruitment process. Vandy also was not, David Price was, I think, a junior when I kind of committed. So that was the first year where there was really some traction, really some success. Historically speaking, Corbs had brought them out of the dumpster, for lack of a better term.
Right.
And so even to think about where they are now, I go to the games and the production and the success is even so much greater than it was when I, was there. But that's kind of, it's a long-winded answer of how I kind of got there.
That's great. That's great.
So he's been mentioned a couple times already. Tim Corbin, head coach at Vanderbilt, for Vanderbilt's baseball, I guess is a better way to say that. But can you talk a little bit about him and people who follow the program know him, but can you just give us a little bit of inside behind the scenes about him and how he interacts and the kind of relationships he builds with the players?
Absolutely. I owe a ton to him because, again, he gave me a unique ability to play for him at Vanderbilt and go to school there. I would say that he is – the people in the local Nashville area know that, he has a fantastic reputation around town. He is that way behind closed doors too. I would say that he is extremely intense. He expects a lot out of himself, first of all, and expects a lot out of us as players. That was one of the things I think that was initially hard for me coming in, was that the expectations that he had and that the other coaching staff had were not the expectations that I initially had for myself. I thought that I was coming in and, going to be in a different situation than what I actually came into. But the expectations that he and the other coaches had started to become the expectations that we had of ourselves as players. And to me, that is far greater than a piece of paper and a diploma. That's far greater than a draft. That's far greater than success on the field, is that if you start to hold yourself to a standard that you weren't necessarily holding yourself to before, you can't really put a price tag on that. And that is, I think, the most foundational way that I could describe him, is that he really does a great job of preparing players a lot of times for the draft through kind of just the program process, but he really, prepares you to be, quality men, quality dads, quality husbands, which is obviously far more important than anything on a baseball field.
Were the expectations the coaches had higher for you than you had for yourself?
Initially, absolutely. Yeah, I think that there was and I had a really hard time as a freshman, and obviously I haven't been to another school, so I don't know what it would have been like elsewhere. But it was very difficult. Again, the links that we were in some ways pushed to, both academically and athletically or physically. But again, it started to just become the norm. It started to be what it was expected from them. And then again, what you expected of yourself. It started to become the norm. And then again, my sophomore and junior year, it wasn't any different from a demand standpoint. but again, your emotional and mental psyche has a lot easier time processing all of it because you've been through it before, and that's again what you at that point expect of yourself.
And that really, I'm putting words in your mouth, but that probably became your family because you had moved away from home. And did you have any kind of support system here outside of school?
I really didn't. No, I knew no one in the local Nashville area. Yeah, I would say the folks within the Vanderbilt, baseball community, as well as some other students at Vanderbilt were kind of my support at that point.
Your first couple years, you're battling the expectations and being in a new place, being away from home, all that kind of stuff. You also battled some injuries. Can you talk a little bit about injuries and setbacks going through that?
I had been dealing, and looking back, obviously hindsight's 20/20, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. I'd been dealing with injuries since some point in high school. So it started with my elbow, and I went through a variety of different, saw different doctors. So as a freshman, I was generally okay from a health standpoint. I really didn't play a lot as a freshman, and so that didn't really lend itself to me being hurt. But I went away to the Cape Cod Summer League and had some elbow discomfort, came back. There was, a little bit of a difficulty diagnosing me. I had some, interesting things going on inside with my elbow that were difficult to, diagnose on X-ray imaging specifically. And so that was a little bit challenging. I ended up going to James Andrews, who, for those that don't know, is kind of a world-renowned orthopedic surgeon who really helped spearhead the Tommy John surgery. And so that's kind of where he really became well-known.
For those that may not know, can you just, in layman's terms,
sure, explain
what Tommy John surgery is?
Sure. So it's kind of the worst thing that a pitcher in baseball would ever like to hear. So Tommy John was the first individual pitcher, baseball player, where this surgery was done on. And so the surgery then became deemed Tommy John surgery from him. But it is where your ligament, and ligaments connect bone to bone, tendons connect muscle to bone. So when your ligament that connects this bone on your forearm to this bone going up to your shoulder, it basically breaks. And so they have to go in and surgically repair the ligament. And it's about a year plus rehab process. But that's the way that, again, James Andrews became, well known. Thankfully, at that point, I did not need Tommy John surgery. And so I rested, came back, ultimately was blessed to have a good end of my sophomore year, and that kind of propelled me into the second summer where I went to the Cape Cod League and was fortunate to have, a good season there, and that propelled me into my junior year at Vanderbilt. But I had dealt with some injuries over the junior year, and then, again, I know that we'll talk about this regarding pro ball later, but I ultimately ended up having Tommy John surgery as well as 2 other surgeries on various other parts of my body, and was very difficult, but I think that was a real way that the Lord used some of those trials, as I know that He does in a lot of other people's lives, to really bring me closer to Him. So definitely a difficult time, but looking back on it, I'm very thankful for those, because, like I said, it was if He was ridding me of me in those moments, any pride that I had, I'm definitely thankful for that looking back.
At Vanderbilt, during baseball season, what's your typical schedule? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or what's a typical game schedule?
Sure. So you played anywhere between 3 and 5 games a week. So you'd play Friday, Saturday, Sunday every week, and then you usually would have 1 or 2 midweek games on either Tuesday and or Wednesday. Monday was historically kind of an off day. And then Thursday, a lot of times you would spend traveling to away games and things like that. So during the season, you're pretty much, you're locked in. It's baseball all the time. And, you kind of come up for air, and then you go back and do it again. So it's busy, but it's also the most fun, because obviously you're training all year to kind of get to that point.
Right. So during the off season, you're having classes, and your schedule's 90% dictated with practice and weightlifting and all the other things you have to do. Then you get in the season, you're playing 3 to 5 games every week, super busy. How is that on your spiritual life? Do you have time to go to church? Are you, just reading the Bible, doing things on your own in your dorm, or what for you? What was that like, and what was that process? Did it hinder your walk, help your walk? How did that come about for you the first couple years?
Yeah, I would say, as anything in life, it just takes an immense amount of intentionality, to really continue to deepen your walk with Christ in any, point in life. I'd say that college is also a pretty unique environment because there are so many different spiritual organizations and different people that you can, help plug into. So I had a couple folks where I met with pretty regularly to make sure that I was, again, that my walk was strong. Reading my Bible, alone was a big thing for me. And then also, too, was blessed to have, there were a couple of churches in the Nashville area that had Saturday night or Sunday night services, and those were huge for me because oftentimes we weren't playing at that time. So I could, again, make arrangements to go because on Sunday mornings, getting ready for games, that just wasn't an opportunity. So thankfully there were places and ways that I could get plugged in regardless of the busy schedule.
How long were you at Vanderbilt? Did you play 3 years or 4 years?
I played 3 years.
And then you were drafted again?
Correct.
So drafted out of high school, coming out of high school in the 45th round. You have a couple good summers of summer ball, good junior year at Vanderbilt. That's your SEC Pitcher of the Year year. What is that draft process like now, having all that success as opposed to the first time coming out of high school?
I'd say it's more serious at that point because, in high school it's kind of an option where, you maybe could get drafted and you might sign if kind of the stars aligned. At this point, it's kind of like this is what you've been working towards. And I was blessed to have such a summer leading up to that junior year and then such a junior year that it was kind of this was going to be the next step if that was the step that I was going to take. So that process takes, a little bit more of a serious nature and tone. The process, though, is the same. So you spend time in kind of informational interviews. There are lengthy questionnaires, lengthy personality assessments, and all kinds of things. That takes place, again, in the winter leading up to the season. So all of that stuff was done prior to a pitch being thrown. But then what happens, which really did not happen in high school because, again, I had kind of written off signing, was there's kind of a cat and mouse game at that point of the, let's say, the appraised value that a team has put on you based on all of their evaluators coming to see you play. And then also the value that you and your representation has kind of put on the season and the ability that we feel like I or any other player had. And so there's kind of a re-engagement process where it's kind of back and forth. Okay, what are you looking for from a financial standpoint? They don't necessarily tell you what they see in you, but they want to make sure that if they're sticking their necks out on behalf of you, that you need to be taken by the team in a specific spot in the draft. They want to make sure that you're going to be, that you don't have too high of expectations, too low of expectations, and those kind of things align. So that's kind of the next part of that process that takes place maybe a couple of weeks prior to the draft. But I would definitely say that, Glenn, it's a fun process. It's also kind of an unnerving process because there's really just a lot of unknown. That whole industry in general, there are a lot of analytics and there are a lot of numbers and, people are measured, but there's also a whole lot of subjectivity too. So you can perform in such a way and know how your performance, but you could have 10 or 15 or 20 people watching you that could view you in 10 to 15 to 20 different ways. So it's kind of it's a humbling process too because of that, for those of us that like to have control over our lives and what's going on. This is kind of the antithesis of that, which I think also grows, or at least it grew me to really trust in the Lord and what His plan was for me, not anything that I could have done myself.
Is the draft before the college season ends, the regular season, or no? Do you have to make it to the College World Series for that draft to happen and you still be playing?
So it has since changed. It is now after the College World Series. So now the entire college season is complete by the time the draft happens. When I was playing, it was so you played the regular season, you had your conference tournament, and then in order to get to the College World Series, there were regionals and then super regionals. The draft happened post regionals, so it was kind of in the middle of the postseason process. So some teams are done, but 64 teams are still playing.
As far as college ball, and also now that you're drafted and you're playing minor league ball or whatever, who would you say was like your most difficult hitter that you had to pitch against? Or maybe like a situation that you were in that you're like, I overcame that, and that was probably the most difficult situation I was in.
That's a good question.
Bringing the heavy hitting.
Yeah.
Right, Ryan with the heat.
Sorry, that was last week, and I threw it at you.
So as a starter, at least as a junior, there wasn't, again, you're kind of getting yourself into messes and getting out of them. So in some ways, it doesn't feel like you're thrown into anything.
It's like
crazy.
every day I was thrown into that. What are you talking about?
No, but as a freshman, and this meant a lot to me because it was at Georgia, and I grew up about an hour outside of Athens, Georgia. Right. And I came in as a freshman. I think I had less than 15 innings as a freshman, so not a ton of action. But I came in to a close game. The bases were loaded with, I can't remember if I think there was no outs and the bases loaded, and I ended up striking out the side to get out of this inning, which, again, looking back, based on my experience, I had no business doing, but it just, it ultimately happened that way, and it just also so happened that it was basically in my backyard. So cool. That was a whole lot of fun.
That's pretty cool.
That is cool.
Was David Price there when you started Vanderbilt, or he had left?
Were you listening to anything at all?
Well, he said Price was a junior when he committed to Vanderbilt. I didn't know what that time frame was.
Was he committed, or that was when you were a freshman?
Yeah, so Price got drafted in 2007. That was when I committed. So my first season was 2009. Okay. So he was a couple years ahead of me.
I take it back.
Calm down, Ryan.
What?
Calm down. You need to explain it like that joke you sent in text earlier.
That's rude. Okay. You took all the fun out of that text message.
Yeah. Now you're drafted. Big difference from round 45 to round number 1. Who drafted you after your junior year? And were you healthy at that point, getting drafted and going into starting your pro career?
The Tampa Bay Rays drafted me. Was I healthy? Sorta. Yeah, so
enough for them.
So I would say that my pro career started in a difficult way. I was kind of inundated right in the face with the business side of baseball. To give a little bit of background, the way that it works a lot of times, as in the big 4 sports. So let's say basketball, football, baseball, and hockey. An individual gets drafted. Prior to signing their contract, there is a physical process. And so most people, again, have gone to get their annual physicals. This is kind of an annual physical on steroids.
You can't say that in baseball talk.
You're right. You're right. But kind of the normal physical stuff, and then you get, extra things done. So you have specific imaging for a pitcher done on your elbow and your shoulder. You get x-rays of a variety of different body parts. You get, EKGs done. You get blood work, which again sometimes comes along with an annual physical, but they're just additional things that are done. Because of some of the unhealth that I had in my elbow in high school, and if you recall, I said that some things were difficult to diagnose. there was a discrepancy between an image of my elbow coming into the draft. And that caused my signing to go off with a little bit of a hitch. So I was just inundated with that process right then. I was technically healthy. It took me a little bit of time to sign. And it was the next season where I ultimately had my Tommy John surgery. So I'd say I was sort of healthy. But again, ultimately, I had those 3 surgeries coming down the horizon.
And who makes those calls? Is that it? So the Rays, they draft you and they say, hey, we see this. This is what the doctors are telling us. Can you dispute that at all? Or is it just what they say goes and this is what you got to do to play here?
So, again, like I said, it is a subjective process to some degree. And medicine is definitely a practice. So different doctors see things differently. To give you an example, in that specific process, there was a Rays team doctor that saw something a certain way. We had at that point gone, and I had seen a couple other doctors that saw it a little bit differently. But again, going back to the business side of baseball, they had used that as a negotiating tactic as we ultimately had my deal signed. So it's kind of a collaborative effort. It's not necessarily one person that makes that call. There's an entire kind of medical department. There's an entire scouting department, and then they have what's called their baseball operations department, who makes all of the high-level baseball decisions. So there's it's a multifaceted headed monster, if you will, and it's difficult to say, one specific person.
Sounds too confusing for me.
So you sign, you get drafted, you sign, finally get through all the medical stuff. What happens when you actually start playing? Where did you go, and what was that process? And kind of what's the underbelly of minor league baseball? What's it look like? Is it glamorous? Not glamorous? There's some websites you can go look at where it's minor league guys using Sharpies to color in their uniform pinstriping and a picture of their cheese sandwich with a piece of lettuce on it and all kinds of crazy stuff. But what's the real world of minor league baseball?
Yeah, you're inundated with the non-glamorous side of baseball. So I signed at that point. It was like August 15th. And so those that aren't familiar with the baseball season, at that point, the minor league season is almost over. So I was actually scheduled, if my signing had gone as it normally would have gone, I was expected to go and play with a team for the remainder of the season. But that ship had kind of sailed. I finished the year down at our spring training facility in Port Charlotte, Florida, which is about an hour and a half south of Tampa. And it's not glamorous at all. So you're kind of getting up and you're basically practicing every day without really playing. There's a kind of a fall, what they call instructional league, that all new draft picks go to. It's across the board, every team has it. I spent time doing that. The first off season, so from September to October, I did that. But again, it's basically practice every day with little payoff, kind of glorified scrimmages, if you will. So people think about professional baseball, they think about what they see on TV. Getting to that point is definitely not as glamorous as that point. And the reason that is so glamorous is because the lack of glamour, if you will, kind of coming down the pipeline.
So there you go. Follow your dreams, kids.
How was as far as, were y'all in hotel rooms? Did y'all have apartments, or how did all that work out as far as then?
Yeah, so traveling away games, you would stay in hotels. And then during the season, depending on where you were, I stayed at certain points, I would rent a house. There were times when I had an apartment. Generally would have roommates too. But all of that as well is kind of on you, the player. Yeah. I was I was blessed to have, again, some financial compensation that came along with, getting drafted in the first round. The unfortunate thing about minor league baseball is a lot of players do not have that luxury. And it's getting better. But especially on the minor league side of things, it is, if someone would say it's a livable wage, I'd say that you're probably lying. It's just really challenging. And, again, and looking at some of those, again, the websites that you alluded to, it is funny in some ways sitting on this side of things, but when some of those guys are struggling, it can be difficult. And I'm hoping that, again, from a team and even a Major League Baseball standpoint, that they continue to start to give more support to even the minor league guys, because yes, there are a lot of them, but they're still the best in the world at what they do. And they're not at the big league level, but any professional sport is incredibly difficult. And in some ways, I feel like they should definitely be compensated at least a little bit more closely with kind of the economics of the higher level teams.
So traveling in the minor leagues, how are you traveling? Is it bus, air, and how far are you going? I know it depends on the league, but for you specifically, how far were you traveling and how did you get there?
Yeah, in the minor leagues, it's basically until you get to AAA, it's all bus. I was blessed to play in a couple of leagues that were not that bad from a travel standpoint. There are some leagues where it's 10 to 15 plus hour bus rides. And it's, again, you're playing every day. And so you'll get done with the game. Most games are at night, so you'll get done with the game 10, 11. Maybe your team takes an hour to eat, shower, bus up, and then you're going to the next destination or you're going home. And so, there were times when I can specifically remember in AA when I played in Montgomery, Alabama, where we played outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, in Kodak, and we had an extra inning game, and we had to get back to Montgomery the next day for a game, and we got back as the sun was coming up. And again, the expectation is you're just playing the next day. And that's kind of, to be honest, that's the case across the board. Even if you're flying on charter jets, which obviously does happen, if you have an extra inning game and you have to fly cross country and play the next night, there's not an I'm tired kind of situation. Regardless of when you get home, you just gotta get up and do it.
So at Vanderbilt, you're playing 3 to 5 games a week, kind of have a set schedule for the most part. Minor league, what was that schedule like for you?
So from a pitching standpoint, you're on a 5-day rotation. So as a starter in college, you pitch once a week. So I pitched on Saturdays as a junior. That's a pretty nice schedule. It gives you a pretty good amount of, kind of recovery time. On the 5-day rotation, which is pretty standard across kind of professional baseball, you pitch every 5 days, which is kind of, again, like your game day. But the other days you're spending all of your time kind of getting ready for the next game day. So those are, aren't necessarily off days as, what some people might imagine. But, from an overall kind of macro scheduling standpoint, the minor league season is compressed into 5 months, and you play 140 games in 150 days. And about like 3 or 4 of those days, off days, are taken up by the All-Star break. So, you get maybe 1.5 off days a month. So it's all baseball all the time.
Stefano's struggling over here. He heard that. He almost passed out when he heard that.
But this is baseball. He's doing what he loves. Is that really days off?
No. It's just on the run like that. It's just
he's calling it work over here.
And that was going to lead into my next thing. I know you talked about you got plugged in during college with the church and all that good stuff, but just during minor leagues and that schedule that you had, were you still able to do the same? I know probably more alone time, reading the Bible on your own was probably one of your only options if you're on the run that much.
For sure. I'd say baseball there is so much opportunity in baseball for, again, guys that love the Lord to really be a light. It is kind of overall, though, a pretty godless environment. It just kind of lends itself, because of the alone time, because of the travel, it lends itself to, some not great things. But even in that environment, I was blessed with, again, a really strong community. There is an organization called Baseball Chapel. So each team, each minor league affiliate has a chaplain. And some of my closest relationships in baseball that still exist today come from a couple of those chaplains where, again, guys that are still speaking into my life after the fact. So it was definitely by the grace of God that I had those, types of relationships. But again, just like in college, it does require an immense amount of intentionality, because community is there, but you definitely have to seek it out.
So you said earlier that you met your wife at Vanderbilt. So during this time, you're doing all this traveling and everything. Obviously, she doesn't go with you, or does she? How did that put a stress on your marriage, or were you married at that time? I don't know.
Yeah, so we met at Vanderbilt, but we did not start dating until a couple years into my pro career.
Okay.
So I retired in 2018. We got married in 2015. All sports spouses are rock stars. I mean, the stuff that they have to, go through. We moved 18 times in our first 3 years of marriage.
That's crazy.
Stefano hates that less than a day's off.
That's normal to you? I mean, is that
I don't want to move 18 times in my lifetime.
I moved once, and that's from my parents' house to my house.
That's a lot of
I
movement.
lied twice, so apartment to house.
I mean, they're fresh in their relationship, man. I'm just trying to imagine that.
But some of it, too, again, obviously at that point we didn't have kids. We packed lightly. Our stuff basically fit in both of our cars, so it wasn't, necessarily the moves that everyone thinks of.
It's still stressful,
but it is definitely challenging. But it's interesting too. It's also times that we look back pretty fondly on, because it's just so unique. It's it causes you to grow closer together in a way that you really might not have had to otherwise. But I mean, it really causes your spouse to die to herself in that example, to really help me chase my dreams. And so, I hope that my wife knows that I've told her so many times, but I mean, she was an absolute rock star supporting me. And again, I was not playing under the bright lights every night because I was hurt most of the time, especially when we were married. So
what's your wife's name? Do you mind sharing that? Madeline, you're awesome. So let's get into that. Your injuries in the minor leagues. You get drafted. You have a couple surgeries in the minor leagues. Can you tell us about that? And then, again, going through that struggle, because that's kind of hindering you from getting where you want to be, achieving what you want to achieve in baseball. So how does that affect your spiritual life as well?
Sure. So I ultimately had 3 major surgeries. I had that Tommy John surgery, which was on my elbow, kind of a complete elbow reconstruction. So there is a muscle that goes along your back and actually attaches in your armpit. It's called your latissimus dorsi muscle. I actually threw a pitch and tore it off the bone. If that sounds like fun.
That sounds like something none of us would hit.
No thanks.
I assume you knew that whenever you threw that pitch.
It was not a good pitch. Okay. Let's put it that way. And ultimately, that was actually the injury that kind of finished my career. That happened. It went misdiagnosed. Again, kind of a common theme for a while. And in that process, I continued to pitch on it. After kind of doing a little bit of rehab in that process, I kind of tore up my shoulder too. So kind of had my shoulder reconstructed. I had that muscle reconstructed, and then I had my elbow reconstructed as well. And so I'd say to answer the second part of your question, how that affected me spiritually, I kind of want to go back to how kind of an athlete's psyche is. In some ways, your best friend is also your worst enemy. It's like you kind of feel like you are invincible until you're not, but also you're required to put so much on the line and so much into the sport to try to achieve, what you're trying to achieve. So it's kind of a difficult balance, but there had obviously been a ton, put into this. And obviously I was trying to get to the highest level, make a living for my family. And it's easy because it's a team sport, but baseball is also a pretty individual sport, especially at the pitching level. And when I was, blessed to have some of the success that I had, it's easy in some ways to get a little bit, off kilter, if you will, from a pride standpoint. And I really feel like the Lord used these injuries to kind of help center me back in the middle lane, and remind me not only of where I came from, but where these gifts and abilities also came from. And so I think that baseball, as I kind of continued to move on, I started to tell myself certain things, and I started to get to a place where if I was really honest and look in the mirror, baseball in a lot of ways became an idol for me. Reaching the pinnacle, doing all that I had aspired to do, held a greater weight in my heart and my mind than it really needed to. And so I think, one of those chaplains actually told me as I retired, coming off of some of these injuries, he said, I know that this stings, but if the Lord is, again, protecting you from you alone, and that's the only reason that this happened, that's something that I think you need to be okay with and you need to have peace with. It was really difficult to hear in the moment, but looking back, I really can't thank him enough for saying that, because that was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment, as the Lord was kind of continuing to refine me and refine my faith and ultimately make me more like him. I wish that hadn't had to happen, but I'm thankful that it did.
And really, I mean, elite athletes at high levels obviously have to have that edge mentally to get to the top and also stay at the top. But that can transfer over into any career and any profession where someone is driven to be at the top, whether it's doctor, lawyer, financial person, someone starting their own business, mowing yards, or whatever the case is. We can all have that distraction of pride that takes us away from, what God really wants us to do.
And I'm sure just from your freshman, sophomore year in high school and the success that you had in college and everything, I know, like Daniel said, elite athletes, and it would have been easy for you to say, woe is me, and just to push away from God during that time. But it's just you having those chaplains and those support groups throughout your time at Vanderbilt and family upbringing and everything like that probably helped you, something that you could lean on during those dark times of being hurt and your dreams feel like that they're not, being, accomplished, I guess, in that.
Yeah, it definitely did. And that's why I think, the Lord's made us all to be in community with one another, because life's not easy. And I think if we all looked ourselves in the mirror, we know, or at least I know, that, it's like I'm not strong enough, I'm not capable enough, A, to do it without him, but B, to do it without folks around me continuing to encourage me in the right direction. So yeah, that, again, that's just the example in my life when, again, I really needed that support, around me, and still do. But I can't speak enough for, again, community, because I'm, just a firm believer that that's the Lord made us to be in community, and that's where we're better.
Did you have any feelings of, I missed out baseball-wise, or do you feel like you gave it everything you have? Because a lot of athletes retire too late. The ones we see on TV who have made it to the highest level, and they're holding on to that thing they love because they don't really know anything else. Do you have any of those regrets, or do you feel like you gave everything you could and it just didn't work out?
I definitely think I gave everything I could. My goal was to not let any of these hindrances be something that would solely in and of themselves take me away. I didn't want to have been given an obstacle and, decide to take the, quote, easy route at that point. I think that there will always be a piece of me that stings to where I feel like I wasn't able to fully reach my potential from an athletic standpoint. I think that, again, probably until the day I die, there will be a piece of me that kind of burns a little bit because of that. But I don't have any regrets from kind of a work standpoint or a stone that wasn't, turned over. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that the Lord has given me peace that, again, other than a little bit of that burning, which is in some ways probably a little bit selfish, I'm thankful that I have peace about that and I'm able to kind of close the door and move on.
Right. Something we talked about a little bit before we started recording were scholarships, kind of backing up a little bit for a high school athlete being recruited in different sports for college and kind of how the scholarships are different for different sports. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can speak specifically to baseball. There are about 35 players on a normal college baseball team where there are only 11.7 scholarships given. Football, I can't speak. I don't know exactly how many are on a basketball team. I do know that there's plenty to go around. For football specifically, there's 85 scholarships. So there's significantly more on the football and basketball side. At most schools, those are the money-making sports. That makes sense. But there is, definitely a lack of scholarships with baseball. So it's unheard of. You see it pretty often on social media where, a college or a college football coach will be in the team meeting room and, again, he's granting a walk-on, full scholarship. And that's, awesome tearjerker kind of videos. I even love those. But in baseball, those kind of things don't happen. It's also extremely rare to even get full scholarships because coaches are trying to, finagle their allotment to kind of best capitalize on the team that they're given. So the economics, again, going back to kind of the business side, especially with baseball, it really is like running a business and like running a payroll system, because there's this certain amount of allotment and we have to make it work. And it's difficult too because the draft process is also pretty unpredictable. So to make that puzzle work, a lot of those guys, need MBAs more than just, good coaches. Just to piggyback off of some of the difficulties that I had, anybody that's listening that, again, there are difficulties and pitfalls that people listening here probably far surpass anything that I experienced, athletically. Yes, it was physical. We're obviously in a very difficult time from, a COVID standpoint, health standpoint, family standpoint. There are, a laundry list of things that happen because of, our fallen world. But the only encouragement that I could, provide is that, the Lord can absolutely use those instances and those circumstances in the deepest, darkest times for His good. And we may not see it. It may take, a while to get that, hindsight. But I would just encourage people that are going through difficult times that it is possible and that the Lord is there and present and working. I think that's important to remember.
Well, Grayson, we are so thankful that you came on, and we can't say thank you enough. Feel free to take that water bottle with you. That's yours forever.
We won't charge you for it.
Yep,
I'm going to frame it if that's okay.
That's your gift. We have some Sharpies. We can autograph that for you if need be. But I think Ryan wants your autograph.
I've already tried.
Before we're done.
He laughed at me.
Well, it's because you were cheesing up with the Vandy jersey. That's what it was.
I was trying to get him involved. Let's go. Come on.
Yeah. But we greatly appreciate you coming on and telling your story and giving some insight that most of us don't get to experience. And you tell your story very well, and again, just thank you for coming on. You're invincible until you're not. We might put that on a T-shirt.
I like that.
Along with the trash panda and all this kind of
all
stuff.
the good stuff. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But I will say, Grayson binge watched our whole first season after he agreed to come on. He's doing his homework there. Sounds like a true Vandy kid.
I wanted to make sure that wasn't something that I needed to be made aware of.
Yeah. So be like Grayson. Binge watch if you haven't, or watch them again.
Okay. Well, if you binge watched them, do you have any questions for us?
I actually texted Zach after listening to his. I thought that he had actually. I actually thought he had lied for a moment.
So before we throw anyone under the bus, we will say that
he did not lie. Come to find out, however, as I was listening, I thought that he had lied.
Okay.
So Zach and Grayson go back a little ways, and we have to give credit where credit's due. Zach actually made this happen for us, but Grayson graciously accepted. So we're giving Grayson the credit.
Zach's a good friend of mine.
But Zach is sitting off camera here for those that are watching on YouTube. So feel free to go ahead and get your burn in if you need to.
It's not really a burn. But you guys had asked, we're talking about money, and you guys had asked if there were any good stories that Zach had. Well, he had said that he had a client down in Tampa that a house cleaner had actually come in and taken some checks and written them to herself and cashed them. That exact same thing happened to me in my first spring training down in Tampa, and I don't know that we had ever talked about this story before, but I heard it and I just was like, he just lied. Completely lied. And then come to find out again, he had a client that the same thing happened to him. So I guess the moral of the story is keep your checks out of Tampa, Florida, because they might get cashed in the wrong direction.
The question is, were y'all in the same place and y'all just had the same person cleaning?
I can't verify that.
Right.
Have you ever been to the Super Bowl with Zach?
I have been outside of the Super Bowl building with Zach.
Got to define Ben.
And we were scheduled to go. Yet we ended up watching the game at my parents' house about an hour from the stadium. So
nice.
Zach, why are you so red over there?
We have been, but not been.
Gotcha. Yes.
Well, I will say he said he had been to 3. It depends on who you ask. He had tickets for 3 Super Bowls, but been inside one. He was honest. He also gave Mr. Eagles over here a free ride to the Super Bowl where the Eagles won.
He did.
He turned it down because he was scared of snow.
That was pretty cold up there.
It was very cold.
It was pretty cold.
Very cold. It was a cold one. It was.
I heard the Eagles today on Sports Talk. They were picked last in the division by the 2 people I was listening to.
Yeah, you think that bothers me? Does that
sound about right?
I'm a realistic Eagles fan. They're terrible.
Jalen Hurts doesn't do it for you?
No, not until everybody does it for you in the preseason. It means nothing. If they win 4 games, and that's fine.
You only have to win 7 to win that division.
You have to understand being an Eagles fan. You don't just go into a season saying you're going to win the Super Bowl.
But you got Invincible.
I think we're going to lose every game.
You ever seen that movie?
What, Invincible? Of course I have.
It's a
Mark
great
Wahlberg?
movie. Yeah, that's a great movie.
It's a true story.
Yeah. Ish. Disney. All Disney movies have that based. Well, not just Disney. All based on a true story.
Well, we'll see. I'll watch all the games. I can, but something's ingrained in you. You don't just bandwagon.
Yeah, Ryan.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, all right. Again, Grayson. Hey, thank you very much. Come back anytime.
Thanks, guys. For having me.
Great stories.
It's fun.
And you know how we ended. If you've watched the episode, we like to end with a Bible verse, and I think you brought one with you.
I did. Is there a specific translation that you guys would like to hear?
English.
I have the English Standard Version right here. So this was actually, and I should have brought one of these. I had this verse on all of my gloves. So I actually was able to have it stitched on the back of all my gloves, but it was Matthew 5:16. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And that was just kind of, again, foundational to me, who I, tried to be in baseball specifically. Was just, again, it was, I tried to be consistent, and I tried to set an example that was different than, those around me.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Hit it on the head spiritually, behind the scenes baseball. One last thing we forgot to mention at the start. We now have an Instagram account, GPS to God. Find us on Instagram, and I'm going to go ahead and commit that Grayson will be the first guest picture we have on there. So we're going to cut the cameras before he can deny it. So thank you for listening to GPS to God. Make sure you like, subscribe, rate us, all that kind of stuff, and tell your friends and family. More exciting guests just like Grayson coming up, but none better. So,
thanks, guys.
See ya.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to GPS to God. Please leave us a rating on iTunes, and also subscribe on YouTube, and hit the bell if you'd like to receive notifications when new episodes air.